Around 2 o'clock in the morning, I stumbled upon a really interesting fact on the US Capitol. There's so much focus there for all the reasons that we've discussed over the last 24 hours. But I learned of an inscription that is on the front part of where the Speaker of the House addresses the joint session of Congress. And I want to show you it because I think it's an interesting fact that adds a little perspective for the moment that we're in. So let me go ahead and turn you around. You're probably very familiar with this image, as we saw a lot of it yesterday. This was remodeled in 1951, but on this area, what's described, you can see here, is the focal point of the room. There are several words: union, justice, tolerance, liberty, and peace. So union, justice, tolerance, liberty, and peace. Again, I just thought those words, it was interesting to learn that those are the words that were chosen. I don't know by who, I'm trying to find out. Chosen to be put in front of all the lawmakers where they meet. So let's talk a little bit about what we've learned in the last several hours. It's still a very quickly developing story. We have a lot of new facts as we take pieces to the puzzle and put them together. And that's what we're attempting to do. So we don't have the full puzzle created before us, but what I can do here for you today is just share what I think are some of the most important bullet points of some of the major news conferences that we saw. I know you're probably busy. I was watching several of them. So here's what we learned today. I think one of the most important things that we learned really came from the mayor of DC, the chief of police in DC, as well as the Army Secretary. And to show you why it's significant, I'm going to pull up the map again. The mayor in DC has declared a state of emergency, and this is going to be kind of like an umbrella over the next several weeks. The Secretary of the Army has come in and has built, they're in the process of building, erecting 7-foot non-scalable fences around the perimeter of the U.S. Capitol. They've also called in National Guard help. 6,200 National Guard members are going to be in the D.C. area for the next 30 days. So it's not something that's taking place over the next couple days. This is extended through the inauguration. So let me show you too, going back to our map, this is the area where the U.S. Capitol, this is where the breach happened. Remember this, if we're going down Pennsylvania Avenue, we're going to get to the White House. These fences are being set up along Constitution Avenue, along Independence Avenue here. So it's a very wide perimeter for the U.S. Capitol. As you know, this is where the inauguration normally takes place, and we expected it to be different this year because of the pandemic. But this is the security that is being in place right now. Again, the mayor of DC issued a state of emergency. This is going to allow her to use more resources in the ways that she sees fit in order to provide security for the citizens of DC. What we're really watching here is an interesting division of power. So many of our stories in recent weeks have focused on that, right? What power does the federal government have? What does the state have? What does the city have? In Washington, DC, it's really interesting because the Capitol is federal property. This is particularly law enforcement here is the U.S. Capitol Police Force, right? It's not the Metropolitan Police Department that is responsible for the rest of D.C. But what I learned actually helped put some pieces together is that Capitol Police called in the city's police department for help. This is one of the reasons why we saw arrests being made not by the Capitol Police, but by local police. I was waiting to hear from Capitol Police to see if they declared a riot. Some of you have asked about the use of that term. When do you call something a protest? When do you call it a riot? And we've talked about over the last year how different people will describe an event in different ways. What I've used as a guide is when law enforcement declares a riot, which can happen on the same day with the same group of people as a protest. So it could be a protest earlier and a riot later. We've used that term to describe the particular incidents that are taking place that we're talking about that are newsworthy. So in this case, the Metropolitan Police Department used the term riot, not the Capitol Police. And so they've really designated this situation in one that they're supporting federal forces. And so since they're using the term riot, we'll use the term riot as well. The police chief has a very succinct, good explanation on this. I know a lot of you have asked about comparisons to different events that we've seen over the last year, including Black Lives Matter protests. He addressed this in the press conference. He says it so well, I cut the clip so you can hear it for yourself about how he explains when we use certain terms, why we use it. And when a riot is declared, it allows a police department to use resources to help secure an area. That might include tear gas, for example, and that might not be something that they're using on a regular basis. So that was good information to get from the local police department to get an idea of, again, federal support that's coming in to secure this area. Right before we jumped on to talk, I saw that the chief of police for the U.S. Capitol Police Department just resigned. 30-year veteran in law enforcement, and he resigned because of what happened yesterday. That was just breaking. I only have one line on it. That's all we have at this very moment. So that's important just on law enforcement side. We do know, remember yesterday we thought we just had like about a dozen arrests. Now the arrest number had gone up to about 68 arrests, majority of them men. Also interesting to note, 56 injuries of law enforcement officers. So this gives you an idea of the tension. One of you asked a great question. Well, what violence actually took place? We're still learning about it, but we have some law enforcement officers injured. We also just at this time are learning of charges. And we'll get to that in a second because there's a lot of talk about different charges. We should know that we're at the very beginning of these cases. And so, you could be charged with something and then more charges could come. So right now it seems that most of the charges and the arrests were made for trespassing, but those will likely grow. So in the U.S. Capitol, we heard from Speaker Pelosi. What I think is important for you to know from her is that she is calling for use of the 25th Amendment. We talked about that yesterday. 25th Amendment would enable the vice president and members of the cabinet to remove the president of the United States from power because of being deemed unfit to serve. How it all transpires, we have no idea. We've never seen the 25th Amendment used. But Speaker Pelosi said this man is deadly to our democracy and to our people. That's what she said. So there's 13 days until the inauguration. There's continuing to be calls for impeachment. Speaker Pelosi talked a little bit about that, said it's an issue of timing, whether or not that would take place. But this is what the Democrats are advocating for on Capitol Hill. Let's talk about what the White House is saying. What are we hearing from the White House? We had a set-in press conference from the White House with the press secretary, not the president of the United States. In fact, she didn't mention the president of the United States by name, but what she did say is she described what happened yesterday as a group of violent rioters undermining undermining what their values are for America, what the administration's values are for America. She said this is the opposite of what our administration values: safety, peace, and freedom. These are our core values. It was a very quick statement. She took no questions and left the room. We haven't heard anything else from the White House at this point. So that's where we sort of stand. Those are the big, important, actually on the record statements that I want you to know about that took place today. A lot of the numbers of arrests, charges, maybe some security efforts, these are all going to develop. But that's what we know at this very moment. So let's go to some of your questions. Aaron was asking, can you explain some of the resignations? It's a great question, Aaron. We saw some resignations today, including the transportation secretary. She happens to be the wife of the Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell. She said she was very deeply troubled by what happened yesterday. Again, she didn't mention the president by name, but says she's resigning as of Monday. She wants to help the transition of power to the next administration. We also saw the resignation of the chief of staff for the first lady, and a list of others that of titles that you may not know as well. But you should know that there's several. There's a handful of people of resignations. Kristen, great question here. Why weren't people arrested on the spot? Right? Why weren't there paddy wagons coming in and arresting people if there were so many people inside the U.S. Capitol? Which, by the way, I'm still looking for a number on that, and I don't know it yet. So we don't have an answer for this, right? We don't know why there weren't more arrests made. But I did do a little reporting that provided some insight into what law enforcement were dealing with. We have to remember at the U.S. Capitol, inside the U.S. Capitol at the time this was happening, were more than 500 lawmakers, the most critical lawmakers in our country, including the vice president. And law enforcement, the U.S. Capitol Police, quickly overwhelmed, had to make some very key decisions. A group of them had to evacuate the lawmakers. They had to get them out of the building. And so we didn't see any of that. So we didn't see the law enforcement doing that part of the job. What we did see on camera is the law enforcement that was getting overwhelmed. Part of the reasons why they looked so little staffed, and there's a question about staffing, was because we had some of them evacuating the lawmakers. Think about it like this, and I'm not justifying this call. This is how I was trying to understand some of the decisions that were being made potentially at the time. If you heard an intruder in your house and they were bouncing around your kitchen, Is your first instinct to go tackle them or to protect your kids? The most valuable items, right, in your household. It's probably to go run and protect your kids. So the most valuable people in the Capitol were the lawmakers. They needed some help and support, and that's what some of the law enforcement did. And I think for the average citizen, you think, well, it takes one police to arrest one man, right? One police, one man. But you've seen enough now to know that that's not normally the case, right? So one thing is very clear: how quickly the Capitol Police were overwhelmed, how quickly they called in support from the Metropolitan Police Department. The chief of the Capitol Police admitted that they were overwhelmed and said that he had never seen anything like it in his 30 years of law enforcement. So he's taking some responsibility there. Again, not explaining trying to justify the decisions that were made, but trying to explain some of what I've learned today from my reporting about why maybe we had the consequences that turned out. There's also this continuing investigation. So Metropolitan Police Department is asking for the FBI's help to locate the people that were inside the U.S. Capitol. Here's the thing. There's cameras all over the U.S. Capitol. We have pictures of everybody. So this is going to be an ongoing effort to arrest those that were inside. Kelsey, you were asking about the 25th Amendment. Hopefully that helps when we talked a little bit about it never being invoked. So there's a question about how it would actually be used. Kat, you asked another great question. Does this fit the definition of terrorism in an attempted coup? So here's the definition. Let me see where I have it. I thought I had it here. I printed it out. You guys should see my desk right now. It's insanity, actually. Let me see if I could pull it up right here. This is exactly what we were talking about right before I joined you guys. So domestic terrorism is violent criminal acts committed by individuals and or groups to further ideological goals stemming from domestic influences such as those of a political, religious, social, racial, or environmental nature. There is no charge for domestic terrorism. So while you can hear people talk about domestic terrorism, if I was arrested in a domestic terrorism investigation, there is no federal charge for domestic terrorism. There are some that advocate that should be the case. This repeatedly comes up in cases that we've seen investigated over the years. There's an ongoing debate about that. Is it a coup? Is this a seizure, a violent seizure, or illegal seizure, trying to take power from the U.S. government? Some could describe it that way. There's a question about the intent of those that broke into the U.S. Capitol. Were they intending to take over power from the U.S. government? Do we know their true intentions? They've certainly disrupted the joint session of Congress, but you cannot be charged with a coup. You could be charged for conspiracy. So these are why these words get a little bit tricky and how we're using them. Who we're describing as terrorists, who we're alleging of terrorist activities. This is why we have to be careful with it. So those are some of your big questions. I hope that was helpful. You guys asked some great, you're asking all the right questions. Let me see if you guys have any others that you'd like us to answer right now. What is the time frame that Vice Pence has been given to act? So this is regarding the conversation about the 25th Amendment. Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, said that she was hoping to hear from Vice President Pence about whether or not he would use the 25th Amendment within 24 hours, in which case she might move towards impeachment. Remember, impeachment is a process. So it's not something that happens very quickly, and that's why the Speaker of the House was talking about timing. This tribe of eight, the fact that they were understaffed, even though they knew the group of people were going to be there, is a failure. This is how a lot of law enforcement is describing this situation right now, and there's a question about why did this take place? Why were they unprepared? One article that just broke, I haven't been able to double source it yet, from the Associated Press, is saying that the Pentagon actually offered the U.S. Capitol Police help ahead of this rally, and they said no. Remember, the mayor of D.C., even if she was like, I'm a little bit worried about this, I'd like to call in the National Guard to help, she has no jurisdiction over federal property. So it's really up to the U.S. Capitol Police, federal law enforcement, to communicate about their needs. And if they determine they didn't need it ahead of time, then that's part of the reason why they didn't have extra support. The Associated Press is citing anonymous sources and said that they were asked twice. So, this is what an investigation could potentially uncover. What about the law enforcement opening gates and taking selfies? So here's an interesting part of that Associated Press piece. Again, not justifying this action, but it seems that the Capitol Police were positioned differently. Remember yesterday I told you about an eyewitness on the scene said the different sides of the building seem to have different personalities. There was a more aggressive group on one side of the Capitol and less aggressive group on the other side of the Capitol, and different presence of police. Well, the Associated Press article now is describing just that the U.S. Capitol Police were prepared in certain areas, but not necessarily prepared all over. Perhaps we can only speculate that this is part of the reason for the huge perimeter that's being set up. What is this perimeter going to look like? The non-scalable fences? Apparently it's going to look like exactly what the fence looks like around the White House. The Army Secretary said that that they were using the White House security as inspiration for that. So Vanessa, a lot of friends have been sharing that it was Antifa, that it was a setup. Have you heard of that trending? I have heard of that trending on social media. I think right now it's really important to proceed cautiously. Right now, we don't have evidence of that. We're still learning the names of the people who are being charged and what the charges are. We will identify these people and we will know exactly who they are, and that will tell us part of the story. One of you is asking, are the resignations normal with an incoming president? Yes, they are. They're normal, but we have to remember that these resignations are happening only hours after this event. And although they're not talking about President Trump specifically, it's pretty clear that this is a reaction to the event that took place. Is there an estimated tally on the number of people gathered? That's a great question. I would have to ask the National Park Service about that to see if we have an actual number on that. So hope this is helpful, you guys. One of you asked, Larissa, I really appreciated this. You said, you said, how are you doing? I was like, how are you guys doing? Are you guys doing okay? I know this news is, it's a lot to take in. I know we've used the term unprecedented too many times, but it really does fit here. One of the things I struggle with is I developed this platform for quick, concise, nonpartisan news. Sometimes we're not so quick when it's a breaking news situation like this, and it's such a massive story. And sometimes I miss being part of a 24-hour news network with a huge team that can help me give you the best. When I think of journalism, I think of being a waitress. Let me explain that. A waitress has a menu of items that you get to choose from, and she delivers them to your table, and you get to sit back and hopefully you feel a little bit more satisfied after eating your meal. But a waitress doesn't sit down with you and talk to you about how you should feel about the meal. She might tell you, a couple of things ahead of time. But I think we've gotten really used to a media that is very aggressive with their own opinions and advocating for a position and looking to validate people and their feelings. And sometimes it can be very difficult for me to take criticism on that because I don't want to tell you how to feel. I want to be like the waitress that you like seeing once a day. And I give you a couple menu selections and hopefully you feel a little bit more satisfied, a little bit more prepared after our conversation. But I'm not trying to... I like hanging out with you. Don't get me wrong. I would totally like to have a meal together, but I don't want to tell you how to feel about it because that's up to you. I'm not trying to convince you of an opinion on this. I believe in you. I believe in how you're smart. You're strong, and you can make up your own mind. And that's one of the things that I think is really missing from journalism today is being able to set out, here are the facts. Here's what we know. Here's what we don't know. And part of being an American is freedom of the press, freedom of speech, freedom of expression. And I want you to feel that freedom every day, right? Curiosity over commentary. If we stay curious, then we are able to feel confident on our commentary. I just don't do a lot of commentary. I only do commentary on journalism because I have a little experience in it and I feel very passionately about it. But other than that, this is a lot to take in. So we have to be patient. We're going to put the puzzle pieces together as best we can. And I'll continue to grab little bit of news nuggets to kind of drop a path along the way that I hope will be helpful. Unfortunately, I won't be able to tell the full story all the time right away. But my goal is to be helpful to you and that we can all be smarter together. So that's the goal. All right, guys, keep your questions coming. We're here to serve you and always want to leave you feeling a little bit more satisfied, like you can put your shoulders back and walk into a room. That's what I want for you. All right, guys, have a great night, and I'll see you soon on Smarter News.